students, we're going to work on completing the square. You did this last year in geometry. When you complete the square to find the center of a circle. If you're in my class, we did it throughout the year, off and on. Now, we're going to add a level to it that we didn't do in algebra or in geometry. Because in geometry, the leading coefficient was always a 1. Notice this is a 2 here. We only started with 1s right here the entire time. Okay, algebra 2, I told you last year, steps it up a level when the leading coefficient, remember leading coefficient is the furthest one out front when it's written in standard form, because it's called a leading term right here. So the leading coefficient is 2. The coefficient of the variable. Remember, coefficient is a number in front of the variable. All right, so to complete the square for a quadratic, remember that means degree 2. When we talk about degree, remember this term is degree 2, this term is degree 1, this term is degree 0. And so whichever term has the highest degree on it, that is the degree of the polynomial itself. And since it's degree 2, all degree 2s are called quadratics. Okay, again, review of vocabulary. You take the highest degree of any of the terms, and that's where the name comes from, as far as naming that polynomial. All right. And it tells you, again, that leading term, meaning written in standard form, highest degree down, will also tell you the shape. That's what tells you the shape of the polynomial. So all quadratics we know graph into a U. It could open up or it could open down if it's dealing with x's. If these are y's equaling x, then it open left or right. Okay. I don't know if we'll get into left or right ones at all. I did in my high school, but they've cut out things, so you might just deal with quadratics that are up and down. All right, vertical that is. All right. Find the value of c that makes x squared plus 22x plus c a perfect square trinomial. Remember when I did it in geometry class, when we found c, we did leave a plus blank. We always said plus blank. And remember that plus blank to get that c was always 1/2 of b. Let me write it better. So that's the plus blank, and it was always 0.5 of b, or half of b squared. You should remember that from geometry. That is always going to be true when we have this coefficient of 1. Okay, so what is half of b? Half of 22 is 11. You can write positive 11 squared. 11 squared is 121. You should know that from your times tables. Okay, then write a trinomial as the square of a binomial. So here's the trinomial, and it's written as a square binomial. It would be x plus 11 squared. X plus 11 quantity squared. Again, I just dropped this plus 11 down. Remember, it's x, and then whatever this is, just drop it down. Plus 11 quantity squared. That equals x squared plus 22x plus 121. You should remember that from Algebra 1. I also taught you this shortcut in geometry last year. You square the first term, x squared, you multiply the two terms together, it gives me 11x, and double it to 22x for the middle term, and you square the last term, 11 squared is 121. You square any binomial, it always turns into a trinomial. The common error students make is they want to leave out that middle term and just say it's x squared plus 121 and blow their whole answer. I had A students even do it last year in geometry. Okay, you gotta remember this. Algebra 1, I taught you again in geometry, and now you're seeing it again in Algebra 2. All right, now solving a quadratic by completing the square. Okay, and this time the leading coefficient is not 1. So when it's not 1, there are two ways to do it. Well, notice here all these are even numbers, so I could divide the entire equation by 2. Okay, and it all divides nicely and gives me all integers as they did here. It gives you your x squared minus 4x minus 12. Now, just as we did, so I'm going to show you this way, and then I'm going to show you the other way. okay? Because it doesn't always work out nicely. Oftentimes these are all evens as they are here, so you end up with all integers. So I'll show you another way, the way I learned how to do it. Focus on doing it that way in high school as well. All right, so now we're down to here. Now this looks like what we did last year in geometry. What do? We had the x's to one side, we move the constant to the other side. Here's the constant, we move to the other side. And then we put a plus blank here and a plus blank there. Okay? And that was my C right here. Okay? And remember, how do I get that? Half of B quantity squared. What is half of B? There's B, -4. Half of B is -2. Squared is +4. And that's why you see the +4 there. Whatever I do to one side, I must do to the other side. So there's the +4 there. And then what perfect square is that? Square root of x squared is x, as you see here. And I just drop that x, the -2, right into there. And I get x minus 2 quantity squared equals 12 plus 4 is 16. Okay? So we're not just stopping there now. Now we're solving it. Okay, remember this exponent tells me I have two answers. So I take the square root of both sides. It's plus or minus. So they aren't showing that. I'm doing that right there. So the square root of x minus 2 quantity squared, that just takes off because it's really a 2 here. So 2 divided by 2 is 1. So you get x minus 2 equals plus or minus square 16, which is 4 plus minus 4. Then to solve that, we add the 2 across, plus 2. So I have 4 plus 2 is 6, and -4 plus 2 is -2. Okay? So this should ring a bell of completing the square, moving the constants to the other side, that kind of thing from completing the square, solving for the center of a circle. You do that in the circles unit for geometry. And of course, I moved that into earlier in the year as well. So you got plenty of practice on that too. All right, so this first part is actually to find C. So we know that's always half of B quantity squared. That's all you're doing. The -5 squared is 25 for the C. Okay, that's what you're doing there. Can be with fractions, decimals, etc. All that you can plug in your calculator. Then write it as a perfect square trinomial. So then I write it as x minus 5. So I'm just dropping that -5 right into there, squared. That would be writing it as a perfect square part. Okay, so the bottom ones, then we solve it. All right, so notice sometimes factoring wise, okay, it's if I see this right here, for example, here's something to be aware of factoring wise, those are forgotten. If the first term is a perfect square and the last term is a perfect square, 25 is a perfect square, 9 is a perfect square, then it's a good chance that's a perfect square trinomial. So how would I check it? I take the square root of that, 5x, square root of 9. Hold on. I'm gonna have to do a plus 9. Then it'd be whatever that term is there. Okay, so that's not gonna work. If I was a plus 9, then I have plus 3 quantity squared. Okay. All right. So what they didn't show you, you can always divide if you really wanted to. Well, you can do this on each one since I'm not graphing it at all, we're just solving. We need to get down to x squared or w squared, 1w squared. The leading coefficient will be 1. So that means I need to divide each term by 25. Okay, I'm going to move this across. It's going to become 9/25. Okay. So now I have x squared, and I can simplify that down, divided by 5 each, and you get 8/5 x plus blank equals 9/25 plus blank. Okay. So again, how do I get this right here? Half of b squared every time, because I got my leading coefficient down to 1. So half of 8/5 is 4/5. And then I square it, which then makes it 16/25. What do I do to one side? I must do the other side, 16/25. Okay? So now that left side becomes x, drop that in there, plus 4/5, 20 squared equals, what's 9/5 plus 16, or 9/25 plus 16/25? 25/25, which equals 1. So now I have that. Okay? Now I take the square root of both sides, and then I take plus or minus. So I have x plus 4/5 equals plus or minus 1. And then I subtract that across, so minus 4/5. And so I have 1 minus 4/5 is 1/5, and negative 1 minus 4/5 is negative 9/5. So there would be my two answers. That's not a point. 1/5 comma negative 9/5. If you want to put or in there, so make sure you know that it's not. It's just two different answers. So this is how we'd solve the equation by completing the square. This is opposed to graphing it, okay, in the graphing calculator, or as opposed to using the quadratic formula, or as opposed to factoring it. Okay, these are the different methods. So this method is called solve the equation by completing the square. We're completing the square each time. Again, you did this plenty of times in geometry in your circles unit. Okay. Oh, that was it. Okay.